Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy gripping mysteries and true crime, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our deep dives. Today, we're unraveling a chilling tale that kept a small town on edge for nearly 2 decades. Secrets buried for nearly 2 decades. The Hillside corpse that shocked a town. The year was 2005. Willow Creek was a town where everyone knew everyone. And the most exciting event was usually the annual Apple Blossom Festival. Nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, it was the kind of place people moved to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, seeking peace and quiet. But that tranquility was shattered on a crisp October afternoon, forever etching a dark stain into the town's otherwise pristine reputation. 15-year-old Emily Hayes and her loyal golden retriever, Buddy, were doing what they did every day after school, exploring the winding trails of Blackwood Hill. It was a local haunt for kids, a place where imaginations ran wild, where forts were built and adolescent secrets were whispered among the ancient oaks. Buddy, with his boundless energy, bounded ahead, his nose to the ground, following a scent only he could perceive. Emily, a budding amateur photographer, was lagging behind, trying to capture the golden hour light filtering through the changing leaves. Suddenly, Buddy let out a series of sharp, distressed barks, not his usual playful yelps, but something more urgent, more primal. Emily quickened her pace, calling out his name, a prickle of unease starting at the back of her neck. When she reached him, Buddy was frantically digging at the base of a gnarled, ancient oak tree, whimpering. The earth around his paws was freshly disturbed, revealing a patch of dark, rich soil that seemed out of place. "Buddy, what is it, boy?" she murmured, kneeling beside him. Her eyes scanned the ground, and then she saw it. Not immediately obvious, but unmistakable once her gaze focused. A tattered piece of fabric, a faded blue, peeking out from beneath the loose soil. Curiosity, a powerful force in any teenager, compelled her to reach out and pull at it gently. What emerged wasn't a lost piece of clothing, but something far more sinister. A bone. A human bone. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the sudden silence of the forest. Buddy, sensing her terror, nudged her hand, then let out another low growl, staring intently at the ground. It was then that the unmistakable smell hit her, a faint, cloying odor of decay, masked for years by the damp earth and fallen leaves, but now unleashed by Buddy's eager digging. Panic set in. Emily scrambled backward, tripping over a root, her mind racing. This couldn't be real. This was something out of a horror movie, not her quiet Willow Creek. She fumbled for her cell phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind, yet it brought a sliver of reassurance. Within the hour, Blackwood Hill was swarming with flashing lights and stern-faced officers. Sheriff Brody, a man whose easygoing demeanor usually defined Willow Creek's law enforcement, arrived on the scene, his face grim. He'd known Emily since she was a toddler, and seeing her pale, shaken face only deepened his resolve. The area was immediately cordoned off. Forensic teams called in from the state capitol began their meticulous work. The initial excavation confirmed Emily's horrifying discovery. A human skeleton, buried in a shallow grave, clearly there for an extended period. The clothing fragments, the state of decomposition, and the surrounding environment all pointed to a burial that predated Emily's lifetime. The news ripped through Willow Creek like wildfire. The peaceful illusion of the town shattered, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. Who was buried on Blackwood Hill? How long had they been there? And, most importantly, who had put them there? Sheriff Brody established a temporary command center in the town hall. He knew that the investigation would be a delicate and prolonged one. The remains, though skeletal, might still hold clues. Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead forensic anthropologist, estimated the body had been there for at least 15 years, possibly longer. The victim appeared to be female, based on preliminary skeletal analysis. There was no obvious cause of death immediately apparent, No bullet holes, no stab wounds visible on the bones. It was a silent, agonizing mystery. The first step was identification. Dental records, if available, would be the easiest route. But who in Willow Creek had gone missing 15 years ago without a trace? The town was small. Disappearances were rare, almost unheard of. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock gave way to a pervasive fear. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Whispers replaced friendly greetings. Every unexplained absence, every long-forgotten rumor, resurfaced with a new, dark significance. Parents kept their children closer, and the once popular trails of Blackwood Hill lay deserted. Emily, the unwitting catalyst of this upheaval, became the town's most reluctant celebrity. She recounted her discovery countless times to police, her voice growing fainter with each retelling. Buddy, oblivious to the gravity of his find, continued to be his cheerful self, but Emily often found herself staring at him, wondering what other secrets lay buried beneath the quiet surface of Willow Creek. The investigation began to focus on the town's past. Sheriff Brody pulled out old missing persons reports, dusty files that had been gathering cobwebs in the archives. There was one name that kept coming up, a cold case that had faded from memory but now loomed large. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had been a vibrant, free-spirited young woman who vanished without a trace in the late 1980s. She was known for her artistic inclinations, her fiery spirit, and her occasional clashes with the more conservative elements of Willow Creek. Her disappearance had been attributed to her restless nature. People assumed she had simply left town for bigger horizons, leaving her past behind. But now, with a skeleton unearthed on Blackwood Hill, that comfortable assumption dissolved into a chilling possibility. Sheriff Brody remembered Sarah vividly. She had been a friend of his younger sister, a whirlwind of energy who always seemed to be pushing boundaries. He recalled the brief, half-hearted search when she first disappeared, the general consensus that she had just run off. No one had truly considered foul play. Until now, the forensic team, led by Dr. Sharma, worked tirelessly. They managed to extract a DNA sample from the skeletal remains, a challenging feat given the time elapsed. They also found a small, intricate silver locket among the scattered bones, tarnished but still recognizable. Inside, two tiny, faded photographs. A young man and a young woman, their faces smiling, locked in an embrace. Could this be Sarah? And if so, who was the man? The discovery of the locket sent a ripple of anticipation through the investigative team. Personal effects, even small ones, could provide crucial links. Sheriff Brody made the difficult decision to show the locket to Sarah's elderly parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, who still lived in the same modest house on the outskirts of town. It was a somber visit. The Jenkins, their faces etched with decades of quiet grief, stared at the locket. Mrs. Jenkins's hand trembled as she reached for it. This was Sarah's, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Her boyfriend, Michael. They were so in love. The confirmation, though heartbreaking, was a breakthrough. The skeletal remains had a name, Sarah Jenkins. The girl who had simply run away had, in fact, met a far more tragic end. The peace of Willow Creek was irrevocably broken. The Hillside corpse was no longer just an anonymous mystery. It was Sarah, and her story, buried for nearly 2 decades, was finally beginning to unfold. The quiet town braced itself, knowing that the secrets of the past were far from finished revealing themselves. The confirmation that the Hillside corpse was Sarah Jenkins sent shockwaves through Willow Creek, far deeper and more unsettling than the initial discovery. It wasn't just a body anymore. It was Sarah, a girl many in town had known, laughed with, or perhaps even argued with. Her disappearance had been a quiet ripple. Her reemergence as a murder victim was a tsunami, dredging up dormant fears and unanswered questions. Sheriff Brody found himself haunted by the case. Sarah's parents, the stoic Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, had carried their quiet sorrow for years, always hoping, even against hope, that their daughter would one day walk back through their door. Now, that faint hope was cruelly extinguished, replaced by the agonizing certainty of murder. Brody promised them justice, a vow that weighed heavily on his shoulders. The investigation, now officially a homicide case, shifted its focus. The initial task was to reconstruct Sarah's last known movements in the late 1980s. This meant interviewing people who had lived in Willow Creek back then, many of whom were now older, their memories faded, clouded by time and the passage of everyday life. Brody started with Sarah's closest friends at the time. One name that kept coming up was Lisa Thornton, Sarah's best friend in high school. Lisa, now a successful real estate agent in a nearby city, was still visibly shaken by the news. Sarah, she was so full of life, Lisa recounted, her voice thick with emotion during their interview at the local diner. Always dreaming of leaving Willow Creek, seeing the world. We all thought she just did it, ran away. It was easier to believe that than this. Lisa confirmed the identity of the young man in the locket. Michael Miller. They were inseparable, she said, stirring her coffee. High school sweethearts. But Michael, he was a bit of a troubled soul. From the wrong side of the tracks, as my parents used to say. Michael Miller. The name immediately flagged a memory for Brody. He remembered Michael as a rough-around-the-edges kid, charismatic but with a reputation for getting into trouble. After Sarah's disappearance, Michael had left town abruptly, never to be heard from again. At the time, it was simply assumed he, too, had sought a new life elsewhere. Now, his sudden departure took on a far more sinister hue. Brody tried to locate Michael, but it was like chasing a ghost. No social security number traces, no driver's license updates, no digital footprint. It was as if Michael Miller had vanished into thin air, just like Sarah. This raised the first major red flag. The forensic team, meanwhile, continued their painstaking work. Dr. Sharma's preliminary autopsy revealed no immediate cause of death, but she did find a small fracture on one of Sarah's ribs, consistent with a blunt force trauma. It was a subtle injury, easily missed without careful examination, but it suggested a struggle, or perhaps a single, powerful blow. There were no signs of sexual assault, which, while not definitive, sometimes helped narrow down motives. The absence of other injuries made the case even more puzzling. If it was murder, what was the weapon? And why bury her so shallowly on Blackwood Hill, a place frequented by locals, if the intention was to hide the body forever? It almost suggested a hasty, desperate act rather than a premeditated, carefully planned murder. As Brody delved deeper, he uncovered some unsettling facts about Sarah and Michael's relationship. While deeply in love, they had their share of arguments, often fueled by Michael's hot temper and Sarah's fierce independence. Lisa recalled one particularly explosive fight a few weeks before Sarah disappeared, about Michael's involvement with a local motorcycle gang, the Iron Hawks. Sarah hated them, Lisa explained. She saw them as holding Michael back, pulling him into trouble. She wanted him to go to college with her, to leave Willow Creek, but he was always drawn back to the gang. The Iron Hawks, another dark corner of Willow Creek's past. They were a small, territorial gang known for petty crime, intimidation, and a general disregard for authority. Their presence had always been an undercurrent of unease in the town, but never outright violence on this scale. Brody knew he had to talk to the former members of the Iron Hawks. Most had either left town or settled down, their wild days behind them. But a few still resided in Willow Creek, grizzled and wary, living quiet lives. He started with Hank the Hammer Riley, the former leader, now running a rundown auto repair shop on the edge of town. Hank, a mountain of a man with a perpetual scowl, was initially resistant. "That was a long time ago, Sheriff," he grunted, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "We were just kids raising hell, nothing serious." But Brody pressed. He showed Hank a picture of Sarah, then Michael. Hank's eyes narrowed. Sarah was a good kid, too smart for Michael, he admitted grudgingly. Michael, he had potential, but he was easily led. Tried to get him to join us full-time, but Sarah always put her foot down. Brody asked about the period leading up to Sarah's disappearance. Hank paused, then slowly recounted a specific incident. Michael owed some money. To us. Nothing huge, but he was falling behind. And Sarah, she found out. She was furious. Said she'd go to the cops if we didn't leave him alone. A new motive began to emerge. Financial trouble, coupled with gang involvement, and Sarah's protective, defiant nature. Had Sarah's threat, or her interference, escalated into violence? Was Michael with you the night Sarah disappeared? Brody asked, his voice calm but firm. Hank hesitated for a long moment. He came to us that night, he finally said, his voice lower. Distraught. Said he and Sarah had a terrible fight. He left her by Blackwood Hill, just walking away. Said he needed to cool off. When he went back, she was gone. Brody felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Michael's story, if true, placed him at the scene mere hours before Sarah's probable death. But it also offered an alibi of sorts, claiming she was alive when he left her. It was a classic he said she said scenario, with one of the she's now deceased and the he conveniently missing. The search for Michael intensified. Brody put out feelers to law enforcement agencies across the country, hoping that a trace would appear somewhere. He also began to consider other possibilities. Was it possible Sarah had confronted someone else on Blackwood Hill after Michael left her? Someone unrelated to Michael or the Iron Hawks. The small-town atmosphere of Willow Creek, once a source of comfort, now felt stifling, filled with unspoken anxieties. The image of Sarah, vibrant and hopeful, now lay starkly against the grim reality of her death. Each new piece of information, while bringing them closer to the truth, also revealed the hidden darkness that had festered beneath the town's placid surface for so long. The echoes of the past were growing louder, demanding answers, and Brody knew this case was far from solved. The secrets buried on Blackwood Hill were finally stirring, ready to expose a killer, and perhaps, the complicity of a town that had chosen to look away. The investigation into Sarah Jenkins's murder was a relentless pursuit, consuming Sheriff Brody's every waking moment. The small station in Willow Creek, usually handling minor disputes and lost pets, now functioned as a makeshift war room, plastered with timelines, suspect profiles, and maps of Blackwood Hill. The pressure from the Jenkins family, the townspeople, and his own conscience was immense. The search for Michael Miller yielded no immediate results. It was as if he had been swallowed by the earth. Brody theorized that Michael, aware of the implications, had either gone into deep hiding or, more chillingly, was also a victim. But the latter seemed less likely, given Hank Riley's account. Brody revisited Hank, trying to glean more details about Michael's state of mind the night Sarah disappeared. Hank remained cagey, loyal to his old gang member, but admitted Michael was scared. Scared of what? Brody pressed. Scared of the consequences, I guess, Hank mumbled, avoiding eye contact. He was upset, really upset about Sarah. Said she was going to expose something. Expose what, Hank? Brody's voice was sharp. Hank sighed, rubbing his temples. Something about the mayor, or well, the mayor's son, David Thorne. David was sniffing around Sarah, even though everyone knew she was with Michael. David was a real piece of work, always causing trouble, thinking he was above the law because of his father. David Thorne. The name hit Brody like a physical blow. David Thorne, now a respected businessman, a pillar of the community, and indeed, the son of the late Mayor Thorne, who had been a powerful figure in Willow Creek for decades. The Thorne family was old money, influential, and practically untouchable. The idea that David Thorne could be involved in a murder was almost unthinkable. Yet, the pieces began to click into place. David Thorne had a reputation for arrogance and a history of brushes with the law that were always quietly swept under the rug, thanks to his father's influence. Brody recalled a few incidents in David's youth: vandalism, a bar fight, a hit and run that was conveniently blamed on a drifter who mysteriously left town shortly after. Brody knew he had to approach this carefully. Accusing David Thorne, especially with the town still reeling, could spark a political firestorm. He needed evidence, solid and undeniable. He began by discreetly interviewing people who had known both Sarah and David Thorne. A few old-timers remembered David's infatuation with Sarah, often bordering on harassment. Sarah, fiercely independent, had reportedly rebuffed his advances repeatedly, which only seemed to fuel his obsession. One former classmate, who wished to remain anonymous, recalled an incident a few weeks before Sarah disappeared. David was drunk at a party, cornered Sarah, and wouldn't leave her alone. Michael had to physically pull him off her. It was a huge scene. Sarah was really shaken. This information, while circumstantial, painted a picture of a volatile relationship between David Thorne and Sarah Jenkins. A potential motive: unrequited desire, humiliation, a fit of rage. Meanwhile, Dr. Sharma had found something else during her meticulous examination of Sarah's skeletal remains. Microscopic fibers embedded in the rib fracture. They were synthetic, dark blue, and remarkably durable, suggesting a uniform or heavy-duty fabric. This was a crucial piece of evidence, potentially linking Sarah to an assailant or a specific location. Brody sent the fibers to the state forensics lab for analysis. He also started looking into David Thorne's past, particularly any unusual activities or purchases around the time of Sarah's disappearance. He found records of David inheriting a hunting lodge on the far side of Blackwood Hill from his grandfather, a place he frequented for solitude, according to local gossip. The lodge had since been sold, but its location was eerily close to where Sarah's body was found. The pieces were scattered, but the threads were beginning to connect. Brody felt the weight of years of secrets pressing down on him. It wasn't just Sarah's murder. It was the entire ecosystem of a small town where power and influence could silence dissent and bury inconvenient truths. One evening, Brody received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was raspy, disguised, but clearly distressed. "You're looking for answers about Sarah Jenkins," the voice whispered. "Look into the old mill, the one by the river. She went there the night she disappeared. With him." The line clicked dead. The old mill. It was a derelict building, long abandoned, rumored to be haunted. Kids used to dare each other to go there after dark. It was also not far from Blackwood Hill. Brody, accompanied by his most trusted deputy, Jake Harding, went to the mill the next morning. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Inside, graffiti marred the walls, and broken machinery lay rusting. But as they explored the upper floor, they found something that made Brody's blood run cold. Tucked away in a dark corner, beneath a pile of old tarpaulins, was a faint, faded outline on the dusty wooden floor. It was a human shape, outlined in what looked like dried blood, almost completely absorbed by the ancient wood. And beside it, a small, dark blue button, the kind found on a heavy jacket. Brody immediately called for the forensic team. Dr. Sharma arrived, her face grim. The outline, though faint, was unmistakably human. The blood, while too degraded for DNA analysis, was consistent with a significant injury. And the button, it matched the description of the fibers found on Sarah's rib. Heavy-duty, dark blue. It looked like the kind of button that might be on a security guard's uniform, or perhaps a work jacket. This discovery changed everything. It indicated that Sarah had been killed at the mill, and then her body moved to Blackwood Hill. This wasn't a random act. It was a deliberate attempt to hide the crime. The implications were profound. Who would have access to the mill, the means to move a body, and the motivation to kill Sarah Jenkins? And who wore dark blue, heavy-duty jackets? Brody remembered that David Thorne, in his younger days, had briefly worked at his father's timber company, which owned and operated the mill before it was shut down. Employees wore sturdy, dark blue uniforms. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer just scattered. They were beginning to form a horrifying picture. David Thorne, obsessed with Sarah, potentially confronting her at the mill, perhaps after her argument with Michael, and then, in a fit of rage, killing her. The hurried, shallow burial on Blackwood Hill, close to his family's hunting lodge, made a terrifying kind of sense, a desperate attempt to dispose of the body quickly and escape detection. Brody knew he was on the cusp of cracking the case, but he also knew that confronting David Thorne without irrefutable evidence would be a dangerous game. David was powerful, connected, and cunning. Brody needed to tie the button, the fibers, and the bloodstain unequivocally to David Thorne and Sarah Jenkins. The town was holding its breath, unaware of the explosive truth that was about to be unearthed, a truth that would expose the dark underbelly of Willow Creek's most prominent family. The secrets buried for nearly 2 decades were about to see the light, and their revelation would shake the town to its very core. The evidence pointing towards David Thorne was compelling, yet circumstantial. Sheriff Brody knew he needed something more concrete, something that would stand up in court against the powerful Thorne family. The discovery at the old mill was a significant breakthrough, but he still lacked the smoking gun, the direct link to David. He decided to visit David Thorne not as a suspect, but as a concerned citizen, hoping to observe his reactions, to find a crack in his polished facade. David, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of controlled confidence, received Brody in his lavish home, a testament to his family's wealth. "Sheriff," David greeted, a polite, almost amused smile on his face. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Brody explained he was revisiting all leads in the Sarah Jenkins case, especially those from the late 80s. He casually brought up Sarah's beauty, her spirit, and then, very deliberately, mentioned her connection to Michael Miller. David's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. Sarah was a lovely girl. Tragic what happened. And Michael, a bad apple if I recall. Always trouble. Brody then dropped the bombshell. "We recently uncovered some new information. Evidence suggests Sarah's death may have occurred at the old mill, not on Blackwood Hill." David's eyes flickered, a momentary tremor of something akin to fear or surprise. He quickly recovered. "The old mill? That's interesting. A dangerous place for a young woman to be alone." "Indeed," Brody agreed, maintaining eye contact, "especially if someone with a strong connection to the mill was there that night. Someone who perhaps wore a uniform, a dark blue, heavy-duty jacket." David's jaw tensed. He rose, walking to the window, his back to Brody. "Sheriff, my father owned that mill. Many people worked there, wore those uniforms. It's a rather vague lead, wouldn't you say?" Brody knew he was pushing a boundary. He decided to play his last card. "We also found something else at the mill, David. A small, dark blue button. The kind on a worker's uniform. And we found an old photograph, a faded one, tucked away, of you and Sarah at a company picnic years ago. She was wearing that locket we found on Blackwood Hill." Brody had embellished slightly about the photograph, a calculated bluff. But the effect was immediate and devastating. David Thorne froze. He slowly turned, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and panic. The polished facade crumbled, revealing the desperate man beneath. "You have nothing," David snarled, his voice trembling. "It's all speculation. My father. He wouldn't let this happen." "Your father isn't here anymore, David," Brody replied, his voice firm. "And the law has a long memory. We have a body, a crime scene, and a growing list of motives and opportunities." David Thorne, cornered, finally broke. The carefully constructed wall of arrogance collapsed into a flood of fear and confession. "It was an accident," he stammered, his hands shaking. "A terrible, terrible accident. I never meant for it to happen," he confessed. "On the night Sarah disappeared, she had gone to the old mill. She had an appointment with Michael there, an argument about his gang involvement and the money he owed. But Michael, according to David, never showed up. Instead, David, who had been watching Sarah, followed her there. He saw her alone, upset. He approached her, hoping to offer comfort, to finally win her over. "She rejected me again," David recounted, his voice hoarse. "She told me I was just like my father, using power to get what I wanted. She said she hated me, and that she would expose all the dirty dealings my father was involved in with the mill, if I didn't leave her alone. She knew things, Sheriff. Things about the property, about illegal dumping." The rage had consumed him. In a fit of uncontrolled fury, he had pushed her. She stumbled, hitting her head against a piece of machinery. She fell, lifeless. He panicked. He couldn't let anyone know. His father's reputation, his own future, would be ruined. His father, Mayor Thorne, had been informed immediately. The elder Thorne, a ruthless and powerful man, had orchestrated the cover-up. He had helped David move Sarah's body to Blackwood Hill, burying her shallowly, knowing that the dense undergrowth and the passage of time would likely conceal the crime. He had pulled strings, ensuring that Michael Miller, a convenient scapegoat, would disappear, his absence solidifying the narrative that Sarah had simply run away with him. The Iron Hawks were quietly paid off to ensure their silence about Michael's movements that night. The Thorne family's influence had ensured that any questions about Sarah's disappearance were quickly dismissed. David Thorne's confession was detailed, harrowing, and utterly sickening. It revealed not only a murder but a calculated, cold-blooded cover-up, meticulously executed by the most powerful family in town. Brody arrested David Thorne on the spot. The news, when it broke, tore through Willow Creek like a hurricane. The shock was immeasurable. Not only had Sarah Jenkins been murdered, but the killer was David Thorne, a man who had walked among them for 2 decades, a pillar of the community, revered by many. And his own father, the beloved former mayor, had actively participated in covering up the crime. The town was in an uproar. Some refused to believe it, clinging to the image of David Thorne they had always known. Others felt a sickening validation of long-held suspicions about the Thorne family's unchecked power. The Jenkins family, while relieved at the revelation, was overwhelmed by a fresh wave of grief and anger, knowing that their daughter's killer had lived a life of privilege while they mourned in silence. The unraveling of David Thorne's carefully constructed life was swift. His assets were frozen, his reputation in tatters. The public outcry was immense, demanding justice. The media descended upon Willow Creek, turning the quiet town into a national spectacle. Brody, exhausted but resolute, knew that while the killer was found, the repercussions of this revelation would echo through Willow Creek for years to come. The town's innocence was forever lost, replaced by a harsh understanding of the darkness that can lurk beneath the most respectable facades. The secrets buried for nearly 2 decades had finally been exhumed, and their stench permeated every corner of the town, demanding a reckoning that was long overdue. The trial would be the next chapter, a public forum where all the painful truths would be laid bare. The trial of David Thorne was the most significant event in Willow Creek's history. The small county courthouse, usually a quiet hub for local legal matters, became a circus of media vans, reporters, and curious onlookers. The once private tragedy of Sarah Jenkins was now a public spectacle, the town's dirty laundry aired for the world to see. David Thorne, stripped of his arrogance, sat in the courtroom, a shadow of his former self. His high-powered legal team tried every tactic imaginable, attempting to discredit Sheriff Brody's investigation, to paint Sarah as a troubled young woman, and to portray David as a victim of circumstance. But the evidence, painstakingly gathered over months, was overwhelming. Sheriff Brody, a man transformed by the case, delivered his testimony with unwavering conviction. He meticulously presented the forensic evidence. The DNA from Sarah's remains, the microscopic fibers found on her rib, the button from the mill, the faint bloodstain. He detailed David's confession, recounting the chilling narrative of an accidental push escalating into a calculated cover-up. Lisa Thornton, Sarah's best friend, testified, her voice trembling but clear, painting a picture of a vibrant, ambitious young woman whose life was cut tragically short. The Jenkins family sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief, their quiet dignity a powerful testament to their enduring love for their daughter. The defense's attempts to shift blame to Michael Miller fell flat. Brody's investigation had also finally located Michael, living under an assumed name in a small town hundreds of miles away. He was brought in to testify. Michael, now a middle-aged man scarred by years of guilt and fear, confessed to fleeing Willow Creek after Sarah's disappearance, believing he would be blamed due to his criminal record and his fight with Sarah. He corroborated David's confession about their planned meeting at the mill, and stated he never saw Sarah again after their initial argument on Blackwood Hill, having left her there to cool off. He detailed how he was later contacted by Mayor Thorne's associates, given a significant sum of money, and told to leave town and never return, effectively buying his silence and facilitating his disappearance. His testimony confirmed the extent of Mayor Thorne's deliberate cover-up. The most damning piece of evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. A former employee of Mayor Thorne, an elderly man named George, who had worked for the Thorne family for decades, came forward. He had been racked with guilt for years. He testified that he had been ordered by Mayor Thorne to help David clean up the old mill the night Sarah disappeared. He described seeing Sarah's body, the desperate panic of David, and the chilling, cold resolve of Mayor Thorne as he orchestrated the cover-up. George, tears streaming down his face, apologized to the Jenkins family from the stand, finally unburdening himself of the terrible secret. The jury deliberated for only 2 days. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty. David Thorne was convicted of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of gasps and sobs. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. The judge, in handing down the sentence, spoke of the profound betrayal of trust, the abuse of power, and the devastating impact of the crime on Sarah's family and the entire community. David Thorne was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The aftermath of the trial was a period of reckoning for Willow Creek. The town was forced to confront the dark side of its own history, the uncomfortable truth that a powerful family had gotten away with murder for nearly 2 decades. The once unquestioned legacy of Mayor Thorne was irrevocably tarnished, his name now synonymous with corruption and cover-up. For Emily Hayes, who had unearthed the grim secret, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. She continued her photography, but with a deeper appreciation for the hidden narratives beneath the surface of everyday life. Buddy, the unwitting hero, continued to be her faithful companion, his innocent discovery having brought a murderer to justice. The Jenkins family, though forever scarred, found a measure of peace. They finally had answers, and their daughter's name was cleared. Sarah, who had been dismissed as a runaway, was now recognized as a victim, her memory honored. They established a scholarship in her name for young artists from Willow Creek, ensuring that Sarah's vibrant spirit would continue to inspire future generations. Sheriff Brody, his duty fulfilled, continued to serve Willow Creek, but with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the complexities of justice. He often thought of Sarah, of the 2 decades of silence that had shrouded her fate, and of the resilience of a town that, despite its wounds, was slowly healing. Blackwood Hill, once a place of innocence, then of horror, slowly began to regain its natural beauty. The trails were frequented again, though a quiet reverence lingered near the ancient oak where Sarah had been found. It was a silent memorial, a reminder that even the deepest secrets, buried for nearly 2 decades, can eventually be brought to light. Willow Creek had learned a painful lesson, but in that learning, it found a path towards a more honest and just future, forever changed by the Hillside corpse that had shocked a town.